dedicated to my son Sean Anthony Steele, in loving memory of my father Richard Steele. Chapter 2 of the Mysteries. The path by which to deity we climb is arduous, rough, ineffable, sublime, and the strong massy gates through which we pass, in our first course, are bound with chains of brass. Those men, the first who of Egyptian birth, drank the fair water of Nilotic earth, disclosed by actions infinite this road, and many paths to God Phoenician showed. This road the Assyrians pointed out to view, and this the Lydians and Chaldeans knew. Oracle of Apollo, from Eusebius. We have shown in our history that the Greeks were not ignorant of the Hermetic art, which they borrowed with their metaphysics. So far indeed as such things may be borrowed which pertain to reason, from the Egyptians and Persians, whose temples were visited by nearly every philosopher of note. Now the Egyptians, that is the Hermetic art, or art of divine works, was by the Greeks called theurgy, and was extensively practiced at Eleusis, and more or less in other temples of their gods. On no subject has more difference of opinion arisen amongst the learned, the high veneration in which the mysteries were held, the intellectual enthusiasm with which the Alexandrians speak of them, the philosophic explanations given in detail by Iamblichus and others, concerning the motive and divine nature of the initiatory rites and the spectacles they procured, have puzzled many inquirers who, unable in latter times to account rationally, have disposed of the greater past as a pantomimic show, sanctified by priestly artifice and exaggerated by wild imagination, natural as it has been supposed to those ethnic souls. But then the fathers of our church, what frenzy should have possessed them, that St. Augustine, Cyrillus, Synesius and the rest, should imitate their follies, transferring the very language, disciplines and rites of those odious mysteries, to their own ceremonial worship as Christians, and that Clemens Alexandrinus should call them blessed. This has seemed extraordinary, and the authorities have been quoted and requited and turned in many ways by modern writers, each to the support of his own peculiar view or modification, often, as may be recognized, at variance with the original sense in context. Warburton's bias is negative and singularly misleading. He regarded the whole scheme of the mysteries as a political fraud, came to the conclusion that the gods were dead men deified, and that the greater mysteries were instituted solely with a view to nullify the lesser one. But, as is natural, H.W. who so shamelessly charged others to be respected as an authority himself, quickly ceased to be respected as an authority himself, and his notions are accordingly quite obsolete. St. Croix, whose researches are otherwise the most complete, sets Al in an astronomical and eminently superficial aspect. 2. Gebling and Laplace see all with vacant agricultural eyes. 3. Whilst the author of Antiquity Unveiled, notwithstanding so much learning to his aid, has found out only the foolishness of the ancients, and thinks that the mystery should be regarded as a depositary of the religious melancholy of the first men. 4. Every trifling interpretation in short has been given, and everything imputed to the mysteries except a discovery of the wisdom which they professed. For although some with superior mind, as Thomas Taylor for example, have examined philosophically, yet from lack of evidence, and being without a guide from anything analogous in modern times, they too dispose of them as immaterial ceremonies, representations at best of abstract philosophic truths. 5. Now this and all such, as the foregoing opinions, are discordant to our apprehension, and injurious to the spirit of antiquity, which not alone upholds philosophy, that is to say, ontological wisdom, as the true object of initiation, but represents the rites themselves as really efficacious to procure it, as the Platonist and Cellus, before cited to the point, distinctly declare, and Cicero, they were truly called initia, for they were the beginning of a life of reason and virtue, whence men not only derived a better subsistence here, as being drawn from an irrational and brutal life, but were led on to hope and aspire for a more blessed immortality hereafter. 6. Nor did the ancients promise this indiscriminately, but to those who were initiated in the greater mysteries only, as the Pythagoreans and Plato in Phaedo assert that by such means an assimilation was induced, and final contact with the object of rational inquiry, which is that identity whence, as a principle, we make our first descent. But Iamblichus more particularly explains that it was by arts divinely potent, and not by theoretic contemplation only or by mere doctrinal faith or representations either of reality, but by certain ineffable and sublime media that Theurgus became cognizant partakers in the wisdom of true being. 7. Heraclitus calls these medicines, as being the help and remedy of imperfect souls. They possessed a power of healing the body likewise, which was extensively practiced in the temples of Aesculapius with various minor physico-magical arts, but philosophy, according to Strabo, was the object of the Eleusinian rites, and without the initiations of Bacchus and Ceres, he considers the most important branch of human knowledge would never have been attained. Servius, commenting on Virgil, observes that the sacred rites of Bacchus pertain to the purification of souls. Libris patris sacra ad purgationem animum pertinebant, and again, animi eventillata, quod erit in sacris liberi purgationis genus. The Greeks conceived that the welfare of the states was moreover secured by these celebrations, and the records refer to them as bestowing that on which human nature stands principally in need, viz., moral enlightenment and purification of life. Without the revelation and support afforded by them, indeed, existence was esteemed no better than a living death. The tragedians, echoing the sense of the people, made the chief felicity to consist therein, as Euripides, by Hercules says, I was blessed when I got a sight of the mysteries, and in Bacchus, O blessed and happy he who knowing the mysteries of the gods, sanctifies his life, celebrating orgies in the mountains with holy purifications, and Sophocles, to the same purport, life only is to be had there, all other places are full of misery and evil. 8. The doctrine of the greater mysteries, says Clemens Alexandrinus, related to the whole universe. Here all instruction ended, nature and all things she contains were unveiled. O mysteries truly sacred, O pure light, at the light of torches the veil that covers deity and heaven falls off. I am holy now that I am initiated. It is the Lord himself who is the Hierophant. He sets his seal upon the adept whom he illuminates with his beams, and whom, as a recompense for his faith, he will recommend to the eternal love of the Father. These are the orgies of the mysteries, concludes the bishop, in pious transport. Come ye and be initiated. But the usage of the Church is not to discover its mysteries to the profane, especially those that relate to the final apotheosis. It is even unwilling to speak of them to the catechumens, says Saint Cyrillus, except in obscure terms, in such a manner, however, as that the faithful who are initiated may comprehend, and the rest be discouraged, for by these enigmas the Dagon is overthrown. 9. There was undoubtedly a secret, hanging about these celebrations, both ethnic and Christian, which no record has divulged or common sense literally succeeded to explain away. The belief in providence and a future state were freely promulgated, and ordinary worship apart from these mysteries with which they ought not by any means to be confounded, since that might indeed be perpetuated anywhere, and has been without essentially changing the state of life. Previous, however, to more fully entering, we are desirous to observe that a few writers on animal magnetism, having within these few years become enlightened by that singular discovery, suggest their trance and its phenomena as a revelation of the temple mysteries and various religious rites, but no one, that we are aware, has developed his suggestion or carried the idea sufficiently above the therapeutic sphere. They appear to have taken the broad view, without particular inquiry into the nature of their rites from the ancients themselves. Had they done this, we speak of the more advanced minds, we are persuaded that with that key in hand, their attention would have been drawn in new directions, and their satisfaction about the modern use of it become much modified by observing the far superior results which, through their theurgic disciplines, the ancients aspired after, different to, as they were superior to any that we are accustomed to imagine even at the present day. The ordinary effects of animal magnetism, or mesmerism, or vital magnetism, or by whatever other term the unknown agency is better expressed, are now so familiarly known in practice that it will be unnecessary to describe them. They have attracted the attention of the best and leading minds of the present age, who have hailed with admiration a discovery which enables man to alleviate pain and maladies insurmountable by other means, and by benevolent disposition of his proper vitality, acting in accord, to restore health and equilibrate repose to his suffering fellow creatures. And thus it is true we can lull the senses, cure the sick, sometimes to restore the blind and deaf to hearing, sight and utterance, and it is a glorious step in progress, cheering and hopeful, a blessing on our mortal suffering state. 10. But are we to halt here always, or how long? The ordinary phenomena of lucidity, prevision, community of sense, will, and thought, have long been familiar and might have instigated to more important discovery, but years have passed, and the science has not grown, but retrograded rather in interest and power, since de Maynard, Pwisiger, Cahoon, Elliotson, Townsend, Dupertet and the rest, faithful spirits, first set their fellow men on the road of inquiry. But the best effects of mesmerism, if we connect it with the ancient sacred art, appear as trifles in comparison. The supreme wisdom they investigated, the self, knowledge and perfection of life and immortality promised and said to be bestowed on those initiated in the higher mysteries. What has mesmerism to do with these things? What wisdom does it unfold? What is its philosophy, or has it yet made an attempt even to investigate the subject being, the cause of its own effects? In common arts, the ingenuity is set to work how it may advance and adapt them to the best advantage. Now capabilities are discovered which, put in action, often prove the fruitful source of more, whereas mesmerism, dwelling together altogether in the practice, the same which, from the first, unfolded nature as far as it was able, continues to run on with her in the same commonplace round. Our sleepwalkers are little better than dreamers, for the most part, or resemble children born into a new world, without a guide, unable of themselves to educate their latent talents, or discriminate truth from falsehood in their revelations. And, as respects the universal medium, they even, who believe in such a thing, take it as it presents itself naturally, having no knowledge of the capabilities or means of improvement, whether it is able to ascend or descend, or what is its right determination. The few experimental tests that have been instituted hitherto prove nothing but to identify the same imponderable through all, and if we make trial of the spirit's instincts, asking for revelations of prophecy and distant scenes or journeyings through the air, and they follow us, those patients of our will, we then go out from them to philosophize, or wonder, or to think no more about it, as the case may be, repeating the same mechanical operations, and witnessing similar effects continually over and over again, until at length the enthusiasm which early characterized the novelty and raised expectation about it, has very generally and naturally died away. Now this, according to our gatherings, was not the sort of investigation that the ancients followed in their mysteries, although working in the same material and with similar instruments, on the same ground, yet their practice was different, for it was conducted upon established principles and with a truly philosophic as well as benevolent aim. Theurgists, indeed, condemn the spirit of the natural life as degraded and incapable of true intelligence, nor did they therefore value the revelations of its first included sphere, but proceeded at once, passing these, as it appears, in the lesser mysteries, to dissolve the medium more entirely, and, as they knew how, to segregate the vital spirit away from those defilements and imaginative impressions which, by the birth into sense, had become implanted there, obscuring the intelligence and that divine eye which, as Plato says, is better worth than 10,000 corporeal eyes, for by looking through this alone, when it is purified and strengthened by appropriate aids, the truth pertaining to all beings is perceived. The Neoplatonists wrote largely of the theurgical art. Many books are quoted by St. Augustine and his contemporaries which are not transmitted, but were destroyed probably through the sectarian malice and short-sighted policy of the later Roman government, which tolerated nothing but luxury and arms. Yet sufficient remains to evince the nature of the mysteries since, besides those before named, Plotinus, Proclus, Porphyry, Synesius, and Iamblichus especially, all refer to them, declaring also the objects and revelations, and in what the disease of the spirit consists, and from what cause it falsifies and is dulled, and how it becomes clarified and defalcated, and restored to its innate simplicity, may be learned in part from their philosophy, for by the lustrations in the mysteries, as they describe, the soul becomes liberated and passes into a divine condition of being. Synesius writes appositely on the early disciplines, showing the fantastical condition also of the natural understanding essence, before it is purified by art and exalted. This ethereal spirit, he says, is situated on the confines of the rational and brutal life, and is of a corporeal and incorporeal degree, and it is the medium which conjoins divine natures with the lowest of all, and nature extends the latitude of a fantastic essence through every condition of things. It descends to animals in whom intellect is not present. In this case, however, it is not the understanding of a divine part, as in man it ought to be, but becomes the reason of the animal with which it is connected, and is the occasion of its acting with much wisdom and propriety. And it is obvious, he continues, that many of the energies of the human life consist from this nature, or if from something else, that is, to say, from reason, yet this prevails most, for we are not accustomed to cogitate without imagination, unless, indeed, someone should on a sudden be enabled to pass into contact with an intelligible essence. 11. That is into the identical apperception of true being, which is not possible under the ordinary conditions of thought in this life. But reason is always more or less debilitated in its energies by the habitual dependence on sense for data and objective proof, and by that modal consciousness which prevents from transcending it. Nor is this the only barrier, since when freed from the encumbrance of the senses temporarily, when in a state of trance they are quiescent, their impression yet remains, and, as Synesius says, a false imagination, which it is requisite to destroy, as well as to banish all influxions from without, before the understanding spirit can superinduce divinity. It is well known that Pythagoras instituted long preparations and ordeals to train the minds of his disciples, previously to admitting them into the deeper mysteries of his school, and his biographer relates how, by divine arts and media, he healed and purified the souls of his followers, and that by constantly holding them allied to a certain precedential good, their lives were preserved in continual harmony and converse with the highest causes. But dense thickets, which are full of briars, says Iamblichus, surround the intellect and heart of those who have not been purely initiated, and obscure the mild and tranquil reasoning power, and openly impede the intellective part from becoming increased and elevated. And again, it may be well to consider the length of time that we consumed in wiping away the stains which had insinuated themselves into our breasts, till, after the lapse of some years, we became fit recipients for the doctrines of Pythagoras. For as dyers previously purify garments, and then fix in the colors with which they wish them to be imbued in order that the dye may not be evanescent, after the same manner also that divine man prepared the souls of those that are lovers of wisdom. For he did not impart specious doctrines or a snare, but he possessed a scientific knowledge of things divine and undivine. 12. The Egyptian Olympiodorus also speaks of the natural imperfection of the human understanding, and how far its conceptions are adverse to divine illumination. The fantasy, says he, is an impediment to our intellectual conception. Hence, when we are agitated by the inspiring influence of divinity, and the fantasy intervenes, the enthusiastic energy ceases, for enthusiasm and the fantasy are contrary to each other. Should it be asked whether the soul is able to energize without the fantasy, we reply, that the perception of universals proves that it is able. 13. As a rational promise to this life of a higher reality, the subsistence of these universals cannot be too often or too distinctly brought to mind, for not only do they reveal in us a necessity of being beyond present experience, but, adumbrating, as it were, their antecedent light, assist much, if perspicaciously beheld, to introduce the idea of that consummate wisdom, wherein this reason, becoming passive, receives the substance of her whole, and the ancients glowingly describe the truth so conceived as an unquestionable experience, one and the same in all, where difference is merged in objective union. And Iamblichus moreover asserts, that the ergic rites conspiring to this end were scientifically disposed and daily defined by intellectual canons, neither is it lawful to consider these canons as mutable, since they are the natural faith of life, and alone of all creeds Catholic and independent, but to transcend the sensible life in rational energy permanently apart is described as not less difficult than fortunate to attain. Hence Plato appropriates the possession of wisdom to old age, signifying by this intellect diving intuitively without imaginative error, a wisdom such as is not worldly, since it by no means belongs to the common life of man, nor is to be hoped for at all either in the early awakening of the life within, but by a transition gradually effected by art away from the profound strains of a baser affection, it is carried up through the love of truth by faith into vivid contact with its whole, and the extremity of all evil in this life consists, according to the ancients, in not perceiving the present evil and how much human nature stands in need of amelioration, and this is a part of that twofold ignorance which Plato execrates, which being ignorant that it is ignorant has no desire to emerge, but may be compared to a body all over indurated by diseases, which, being no longer tormented with pain, is neither anxious to be cured, but he who lives in the consciousness of something better will meditate improvement, and desire is the first requisite. Indeed, without desire on our part, art will labor for us in vain, since will is the greatest part of purgation, and through the means of this, says Synesius, both our deeds and discourses extend their hands to assist us in our ascent, but this being taken away the soul is deprived of every purifying machine because destitute of ascent, which is the greatest pledge of reconciliation. Hence disciplines willingly endured become of far greater utility, while they oppose vexation of evil and banish the love of stupid pleasure from the soul, but the fantastic spirit may be purified, even in brutes, continues this author, so something better may be induced. How much will not the regression of the rational soul be therefore base, if she neglects to restore that which is foreign to her nature, and leaves lingering upon earth that which rightly belongs on high, since it is possible, by labor and a transition into other lives, for the imaginative soul to be purified and to emerge from this dark abode, and this restoration indeed one or two may obtain as a gift of divinity and initiation. Then, indeed, the soul acquires fortitude with divine assistance, but it is no trifling contest to abrogate the confession and compact which she has made with sense, and in this case force will be employed, for the material inflictors will then be roused to vengeance, by the decrees of fate, against the rebels of her laws, and this is what the sacred discourse testifies by the labors of Hercules, and the dangers which he was required to endure, and which everyone must experience who bravely contends for liberty, till the understanding spirit rises superior to the dominion of nature and is paused beyond the reach of her hands. 14. Hence, and from the foregoing evidence, it may have become probable that modern art has hitherto unfolded but a small and inferior part only of the spirit's life, nor has experience yet opened into those temptations and trials which the consciousness must necessarily pass through, all the while regressive, before it reaches into the central illumination of truth. Nor does anything occur to us more beautifully suggestive than the Holy Passage, from which we here gather, wherein Synesius describes not only the life that is operated upon and, in graceful terms, the artifice, but shows the conditions of desire and will, so indispensable for advancement, the labors and dangers likewise which attend those who aspire to the upper grades of intellectual science. And is it not true, as he remarks so far, we do lead for the most part a fantastic life, nor least they who least suspect it, for it is the shining of truth that makes this visible, as a cloud before her face. Are we not filled too with conceits and roving imaginations and idols, which we are evermore mistaking for the real good? Do we not abound in sects and dissensions, heresies and doubts, so that scarcely two are to be found agreeing on all points, and the causes are obvious? Without a standard and sure foundation to build on, we judge, as we are only able, with the rudimentary faculties and senses that are born in us, and of all nature, as through a glass darkly. If, therefore, with this same misunderstanding and infected spirit, we enter in for the discovery and contemplation of ourselves, it will be useless, we shall not there discern the true hypostasis, but err amongst the turbulent and shadowy impressions of this life's birth and sphere of accidents, thus mingling with the soul of the universe, without purification or any distinction of its light. Our vehicle disports herself oftentimes in many mingling forms, as it is with those who dream or make to themselves a fool's paradise with the druggist's gas, since this, even impure as it is and full of folly, being a flight nature with our life, coalesces, and would, if allowed to persist, consume its rationality. And on this account we observe the ancients more particularly warn about the treatment of their spirit, which, though of a higher birth and instinct, as we may observe in the comparison of mesmerized patients and those under the influence of chloroform or common ether, and capable of so much higher, even as they say of the highest intelligence, yet in proportion may suffer also the most fearful degradation. Accordingly, if the will incline downwards, persisting to grovel, or evil agencies intervene, then, as the sacred discourse has it, the spirit grows heavy and sinks into profound Hades. It is necessary that the mind, once seated in this spirit, should either follow or be drawn by it. Hence, if growing predominant in folly, she should cease to aspire, the whole identity, being submerged together, would be converted to her life, for is she not that very sphinx of the labyrinth, the devourer of strangers and all who have not the wit to unriddle her and know themselves? At all events, such is said to be the nature of the fantastic spirit before it is mundified, that he who enters so far as to be profoundly conscious in her essence, will be lost in irrational confusion, if he assume not quickly his intellectual energies and solve, that is comprehend, it on its own ground. For, if reason remains passive, this nature at length prevailing, will ravage and devastate and take possession of the whole mind, destroying its active energies and converting them to herself. Thus Iamblichus, speaking of this mundane spirit, says, it grows upon and fashions all the powers the soul, exciting in opinion the illuminations from the senses, and fixes in that life the impressions which descend from intellect. And Proclus, concerning the same nature, declares that, it folds itself about the indivisibility of true intellect, which is in its center, conforms itself to all formless species, and becomes perfectly everything from which Dianoia and our individual reason consists, and, as it is commonly observed to be a vain labor to infuse doctrine into a perplexed and turbid brain, or for a merely practical and speculative soul to judge of abstract propositions, just so, no doubt, the best constituted minds would be inadequate to self-inspection on their first entrance into life, for the spirit understands the affections of the mind, and reflects its image as it is, whether good or evil, but the primary and proper vehicle of the mind, when it is in a wise and purified condition, is attenuated and clear-seeing. When however the mind is sensually affected, then this vehicle is dulled and becomes terrene. The instincts are said to be imperfect just in proportion as the perceptive medium is impure, and therefore it needs alternation and solution, as the oracles teach, for the discernment of good and evil, and the proper choice of life. It is therefore that the alchemists so much declaim against the vulgar matter as it is at first made known, full of heterogeneous qualities and notions, as a subject fallen from its sphere and defiled. Hence all those preparations, solutions, calcinations, etc. before it becomes to be the mercury of the philosophers, pure, agile, intelligent, living, as they say, in her own sphere, as a queen upon her throne. Take, says Albertus Mangus, the occult arcanum, which is our brass, and wash it that it may be pure and clean. The first rule of the work is a perfect solution. 15. All which we understand with reference to the universal mundane spirit, as it is at first consciously revealed in the recipient life of humanity, which Aristotle, in his Metaphysics, calls passive intellect, because capable of receiving and being converted to all, the best pure worst inclination, the highest truth or the most delusive imaginings, of manifesting motives and vital effects, and within certain limits of organizing even and transporting them, and this we take to be the identical agent which is spread abroad in the present day mesmerizing, the photogenic medium, our new imponderable, for it is the common soul, also the subject matter of the alchemists aforesaid, when they call it a thing indifferent, abject, and exposed in all hands, moving here below in shadowy manifestation, invisibly and unconsciously converted to every will and various use. It is what the world cares not for, as the adept says, but disesteems it. It hath it in its sight, carries it in its hands, yet is ignorant thereof, for it passeth away with a sudden pace without being known, yet. These treasures are the chiefest, and he that knows the art, and the expressions, and hath the medium, will be richer than any other. 16. But, in its natural state, the microcosmic life is not dissimilar from the vitality of the greater world, which is included by respiration in the blood of all creatures, maintaining its perpetual pulsation, as of the wind and waves, their flux and reflux, supplying to all existence the food of life. And how much such a life is in need of melioration, how much it suffers and desires, and how far its beneficence falls short of human hope and capability, may be apparent, and that in her doorkeeper, Isis is not revealed. But so far we have yet advanced only to the gate of the great labyrinth, where the Sphinx is even now present, rapidly propounding her dark riddles in the world, images of the obscure and intricate nature of the human spirit, which, by the devious windings, delusive attractions and similitudes of its own included sphere, leads imperceptibly, as it were, by an alluring grace, into that hermetic wilderness and wild of magic in which so many adventurers have gone astray. This is the monster and the eternal riddle explained to common sense as suits it, but misunderstood to this day, that compound simple and ground of the Magian's elements, a thing so perplexedly treated of by them, and having about it such a latitude for sophistication, that it is almost impossible to collect or unravel what has been said of it, or how should reason attempt to define an essence all-comprehending, yet separated in each particular, by so great an interval from itself. But this is that Augean stable that was to be cleansed, that most famous labor of the philosophic Hercules, nor the least of labors, to turn the current of life into another channel, and purify the natural source. Close upon the revealment of the media life then, as we take it, in order of the mysteries followed the purificative rites, which were designed also to restore the monarchy of reason in the soul, and this not either as an end so much, but as preparatory to undergoing the final initiations. We are induced, however, to dwell longer on this first step, and on the necessity of intellectual preparation and auxiliaries, because it may be objected, as we proceed to unfold the ultimate tradition of this wisdom, that we have no valid witness to our side, that any individual may declare according to the revelations of his mind, and introduce a various imagination to the idea of truth, that even supposing the mind included for a while and entirely free from outward impressions, still, retaining as it must the original bias, not only of sense but of birth and education, its experience will be neither trustworthy nor important to this life, and then nothing of a universal character, such as the ancients speak of, has been observed, or if asserted, how should it be scarcely proven? Reason in these days is not content with affirmation, it will have objective response to its faith, all the pretensions, therefore, to internal lights and revelations have ceased to attract the attention of mankind, and again, it may be inquired why, if true being is everywhere totally present, it is not so perceived, and why all things partaking do not enjoy the light of the so-called superstantial world. In reply to this last objection, we would ask if it be not because that very light is drawn outwardly, and enchanted by sense that it is internally unconscious and oblivious everywhere of the great identity whence it springs, if that were applied inwardly which now looks out, and every natural impediment removed, experience might then reveal to us the antecedent life. But the former objections recur here, there are impediments, and it behoves us to consider scrupulously, but without prejudice, the possibility and tests of such an experience, for if by this traditionary fall and outbirth, the understanding is so polluted as to be no more able, as Lord Bacon supposes, 17, to reflect the total reason to itself, introspection will be useless, and the central mystery remains, as respects humanity, a hopeless problem after all, none better than the ancients, who profess to have enjoyed the rational life in its most intimate spheres, and to have reaped its most real and lasting advantages, describe the folly and fatal allurements to which they are subjected who trust themselves to remain passively dreaming in the region of the fantasy, with its notions and instincts, often more false, fleeting, and evil than the corporeal images with which sense is conversant. It is for this cause they insist so much that, before anyone betakes himself to the inner life of contemplation, before he hopes, we mean, to pass into its reason, that all else be effectually obliterated, and the mental atmosphere made clear and passive. Before its objective light, without this, they promise nothing, with it, all, and on this possibility, namely, of purifying the human understanding essence, and developing to consciousness its occult causality, the transcendental philosophy of the mystics may be observed to hinge entirely and exceed every other, for that there is a foundation of truth in existence, is as necessary for us to admit as that we are ignorant of it, and the doubt rather remains also about the discovery of means, than the possibility of self-knowledge. To continue then, partly on the authority of the Greek philosophers and partly on some other grounds hereafter to be disposed of, we are led to infer that the Hermetic purifications and mysteries, celebrated in the Eastern temples and by the priests at Eleusis, were real and efficacious for the highest ends that philosophy can propose to itself, namely, the purification and perfection of human life, and that inasmuch as the object was different and immeasurably superior to those proposed by modern mesmerism, or any other art or science of the present day, so also were the means employed, the particulars of which are further discussed under the practice, and the administration in proportion purer, holier, and entirely scientific. For does not all our experimentalism and philosophy end in fact where the ancients began, purifying the vital spirit in its proper light? Or if anyone think we have been discussing all the while a mere nothing, and developing a vain imagination, we admit it, suggesting only that which is, in his mind, so mere or nothing, becomes in that of a philosopher to be the all in all. But who will now conceive the full latitude and substantiality of this principle, or the true metaphysical use thereof? Few, very few, Philolaus said, there were in his day, and who will even inquire now, or believe that it is the very same which solved and resolved, and wisely manipulated, becomes to be the concrete stone of philosophers, in its pure, passive expanse, a mirror of the Catholic reason of nature, and the medium of that holy and sublime experience granted to man alone in the divine alliance, ex natura et divina factum estate, as Reuchlin, in the Mirific word, expresses it. Divinum enumque cum divinitude conjunctum dividus substantius facit, take that which is least, and draw it by artifice into the true ferment of philosophers. Although our metal is exteriorly dead, yet it has life within, and wants nothing more than that which in the eyes of a philosopher is the most precious should be collected, and that which the men set more value on be rejected, and these words are manifest without envy, says the Greek Eratosthenes. Oh, how wonderful different and detract nothing, only in the preparation removing superfluities. 18. From that which is perfect nothing more can be made, for a perfect species is not changed in its nature, neither from an utterly imperfect thing can art produce perfection, but this universal spirit is described as our middle substance, passive, undetermined, susceptible of conversion and all extremes, and such accordingly we understand to be the one thing requisite, purifying and to be purified itself by itself, in turn agent and patient, which of the Hermetic luminaries, in their full representative advancement, the sun and moon philosophical, passing through many phases from imperfection to perfection in the true magistery, and the Hermetic art would seem to consist simply in the right disposition and manipulation of this our undetermined subject, taking her where nature leaves, and by divers operations, to be hereafter noted, as of amalgamation, distillation, filtration, digestion, and lastly by sublimation to the head of an appropriate vessel, establishing her in a new and concentric form of light. Nor may this seem a fable to the wise, since all things live according to their kinds, their life is light which in them hidden lies, discerned by the eyes of soaring minds. To them discovered as true nature's map, by whom produced nothing is by hap, for she her secret agent doth possess, which in the universe is only one, but is distinct through species numberless, according to their seeds, which God alone in the beginning did produce, and then set them their law, found out by mental men. 19. But a long interval is between, and all the labors of that heroic intellect to be passed through before the rejected keystone regains her head place. None but a philosopher ever achieve the work, or for reasons that are imperative, ever will. The idle and vicious are totally excluded, nor are the rewards of wisdom to be won by fools wanting the very principles of melioration in themselves. Nemo enim dated, quod non habet, he only that hath it can impart, and he only has it who has labored rationally in the pursuit, as is exemplified in that saying of Esdras, the earth giveth much mould, whereof earthen vessels are made, but little dust that gold cometh of 20.
Non levis ad census, si quis petat ardua, sudor plurimus unc tollit, nocturna insomnis olivae moritur, delet quod mox laudaverit in se, qui cupit aeternae donari frondis honore.
References: 1. See Divine Legation, Volume 1 2 Street Croix des Mystères, 2 vols, 8 vo 3, Geblin, Monde Primitif, La Pluche des Soutes 4, L'Antiquité des Oily Passes Usages, etc. 5. Dissertation on the Eleusinian and Bacchic Mysteries 6, De Legibus, Lib 2, Cap 14-7, Iamblichus on the Mysteries, Taylor, page 109-8. See Pretextus, Hists, November Lib 4, Divine Legation, Volume 1, Des Septines, Chapter 2-9. See the extracts rendered by De Septines, in his Religion of the Greeks, Chapter 2-10. See Zophist, Passim 11. See Taylor's Proclus on Euclid, the extract from Synesius, Volume 2-12. Iamblichus, Life of Pythagoras, Chap. 16, 17-13. See Porphyry's Aid to Intelligibles, Taylor 14. See Taylor's History of the Restoration of the Platonic Philosophy in Volume 2 of his Proclus on Euclid 15. Secret, Tact, Alberti, in fine, Artis Auriferi 16. Aquarium Sapientum, Part 2, in fine, Vaughan's Column Terry 17. See his Instauration of the Sciences, Subinit 18. Aristotle's in Rosario, and in the Lucerna Salus 19. Irenarius Maro of Alchemy, Book 120. Esdras, Cap 3, Book 1. Chapter 3. The Mysteries continued. It is necessary that the soul, when purified, should associate with its generator, Porphyry, augs to intelligib. We have so far developed the nature of the internal life only, as it was at first revealed to the aspirant in the lesser mysteries, and this was the only popular initiation open to all. It represented, according to the accounts, a new and fertile field of natural contemplation which everyone was at liberty to appropriate, and where each roamed at pleasure without rule or subordination, and without that consent and sympathy which the uniformity of life produces. Previous to the purificative rites little change, therefore, was effected. It gave a passing experience to the multitude, and in a few awakened the desire and hope of better things, just as amongst us mesmerism, which of all modern arts is most pertinent to this philosopher's working in the same matter, affords entrance together with the imagination of another life, and more than this, in well-conditioned cases, we have proof of the intrinsic intelligence and power of the free spirit which can expatiate into the whole circumference of its sphere and reveal hidden things, exhibiting a variety of gifts. It can philosophize also more or less well according to the direction, natural purity, and relaxation of the sensual bond, but not all that men wonder at in the present day, the insensibility, the cures, the mental exaltation, nor much more of the same class which the trance spontaneously develops even in the best subjects, could satisfy the exacting reason of our forefathers, desirous rather to investigate the thing itself, the subject of so many marvels. They passed the first phenomena to look for causes, experimenting within.
Voluovum philosophorum dissolvere part philosophicium ini investar, nam hoc et initium a alia, c'est de experimental friar, 1, en to concentrat de whole vitality, to turn de spiritual eye. to purify and analyze the total essence and draw forth the true efficient and to know it in co-identity, t water object and the hereafter g. For it is not, say, ta the spirit is free from material bondage, or able to range the universe of her own sphere, ta guarantee the truth of her révèlement, or help the consciousness onto subjective experience. For a concentrative energy is needed, and the intellect penetrating into a sphere, rated en discursive in own.
There are many ways known and practiced of entrancing the senses, and the key of the Hermetic vestibule may be said to be already in our hands, which are able to dissolve the sensible medium and convert it to the experience of another life, too. But the order in which the next solution, or resolution rather, was operated, which was to translate the consciousness underneath this medium by obscuration, towards the central source, is known probably to very few in the present day, for it is entirely concealed from the world. They only, amongst the ancients who had fulfilled the previous rites and undergone all the required ordeals, were entrusted with the passport. It discovers a fearful mystery in the opening sensation of power, in a life which, at its entrance, is described as dark, delusive, and dangerous, and more corrupted far than the foregoing, but through which it is quite necessary to pass before inquiry can hope to meet its object in the Elysian light. Tenent media omnia sylvi, cositusque senulabans circumfluit atro. Betwixt these regions and that upper light, deep forests and impenetrable night possess the middle space, the infernal bounds, Cocytus, with his sable wave surrounds. 3. We are aware that the descent to the infernal regions and all those highly wrought descriptions of the poets, concerning the riches and powerful allurements of Pluto's kingdom and Hades, have been looked upon, and very naturally, as purely imaginative, and the representations of the same in the mysteries as our pictorial or pantomimic show. But as we have hitherto been enabled to regard the minor celebrations from an esoteric point of view, showing their relationship to more modern experience in the Hermetic art, we hope to continue on our adventure, being not without precedent either or guiding authority over the same ground, for it is not absurd to suppose that men should have philosophized and composed so many excellent and sublime discourses from the contemplation of shadows only, but setting aside such a notion, neither do we conceive that by Hades, or that profound Lethe, the ancients understood a corporeal nature, or this fleshly existence of ours, or anything in fact with which the whole allusion is to a state of vital submersion in the mysteries, when the consciousness is artificially drawn about the penetralia of its first life. Nor, if we may credit accounts, is the descent difficult, or so far off, but the infernal gates lie open to mortal men on earth, but because of the arduous nature of the reascent and for the sake of securing it, lest unprepared souls, presuming to enter, should be taken captive by deluding and fatal desires, and work irremediable evil there, every precaution has been instituted to keep the way a secret from the world, as well for its own sake as for the cause of justice and divine wisdom about to be revealed, wherefore the Sibyl warns Aeneas of the danger of his undertaking in those memorable lines, Facilis descensus Averni, noctis Atwood patet atri janul ditis, sed revoce gradum superasque evadier horas, hoc opus, hic labor estate, porsi quosi equus amavit Jupiter, aut ardens evexit adithi veortus, divis geniti pochia. 4. The grand requirement of the mysteries after the first purificative rites, the inclination being already freed from the dominion and all the superficial progeny of sense, was that the will should conceive within itself a motive purely rational to withstand the temptations of its next including sphere, that it might be enabled to follow the true path upward, penetrating through darkness, and defilements, and dissolution even, to the discovery of wisdom in her light abode. To the Aeneas accordingly directed by the Sibyl, whom we follow, after her warning already given, to search for that well-distinguished, most mysterious golden bough.
Oru et folui et lento vimin ramu, junoni infernae sace, 5.
Without which as a propitiation he may not venture on the subterranean research, but it may be asked, why this myrtle branch was represented to be of gold, not merely for the sake of the marvelous. Warburton tells us, we may be assured, A golden bow was literally part of the sacred equipage in the shows, a burden which the us, who carried the mysteries, we may believe, was proud of, but of what kind this branch was, Apelles partly indicates in his procession of the initiated into the mysteries of Isis, where we find it connected with the mercurial caduceus and treated as a most important symbol in initiatory rites. 6. Which we therefore understand ontologically, as a ray of living light, golden and flexible, the true branch spiritualis of Raymond Lully, intellectus naturam habens subtilum ad intellignadum res intellibiles. 7. Insinuating by rational penetration alone through the murky circumference of the chloric ether into its own congenial life, which is Proserpine, and that lapsed soul of ours, seated in her dark hypostasis unknown, whose vapor is so subtle and transient that nothing but the glance of its proper intellect by faith can arrest it, and those doves that led the way to, are they not known to our alchemists and those chosen seats? But to be brief, it is only by exceeding zeal and piety of intention, such as is ascribed to Enos in search of his father, and a prevailing reason, that the seeking mind becomes fitted for establishment in her essence and percipient of her final duty to separate the good and reject the evil therein by birth allied, that she may know to what she ought to aspire, dismissing every other consideration, where desires are images and will there act. Thus Plato says, it is necessary that a man should have his right opinion as firm as adamant in him when he descends into Hades, that there likewise he may be unmoved by riches or any such like evils, and may not, falling into tyrannies and such other practices, doing curable mischief and himself suffer still greater, but that he may know how to shun extremes on either hand, both in this life as far as possible and in the whole hereafter. 8. And again, in the 7th book of the Republic, he who is not able by the exercise of his reason to define the idea of the good, separating it from all other objects and piercing, as in a battle, through every kind of argument, endeavoring to confute, not according to opinion but according to essence, and proceeding through all the dialectic energies with an unshaken reason, he who cannot accomplish this, neither knows he the good itself, nor anything that is properly denominated the good. And would you not say that such a one, if he apprehended any certain truth or image of reality, would apprehend it rather, through the medium of opinion than of science, that in the present life he is sunk in sleep and conversant in the delusions of dreams, and that descending into Hades, before he is roused to a vigilant state, he will be overwhelmed with a sleep perfectly profound. 9. To fall asleep in Hades was indeed to be absorbed, without the encumbrance of body, in all its defilements, according to the philosopher, the direst evil that can befall anyone, or, as Virgil has it, to be a king in hell, but with all the earnings of difficulties, and dangers, and death, to be encountered. No hero or demigod occurs in the poets, but he sometime descended to the infernals, and had free egress thereafter to the Elysian fields, but to a described a suffering for the attempt, Theseus and Perithous, who, as Proclus admirably explains, would attained there, the one because he was too much a lover of corporeal beauty, the other through his natural inability to sustain the arduous altitude of divine contemplation. In the 6th book of the Aeneid, Virgil has gracefully set forth the whole transaction of his successful hero, with the labors and difficulties, and appalling visions that attended on the outset of his pious research, all which has been shown by Warburton 10, and other learned commentators, to bear close allusion to the mysteries, in which we have reason also to believe the poet himself was profoundly initiated, and whose allegoric conduct, therefore, we pursue as an inquiry of intellect after its paternal source. To continue, then, in order of the tradition, after the ordeal rites had been undergone, and the few who were found fit, selected for further initiation, the concession of more arcane mysteries succeeded. Gressus remivit profani jam furor humanus nostroda pector sensus excluit. 11. As the consciousness passing the middle region, clear and rational from out the aquaster, enters the fire world, and the Sibyl leads her hero to the doubt descent, spelunca altafut, vasdoc immanis hiatus, scrupia, tuta lacuna gronem ram tenebris, quam super hoduli poterant impunt volens tenedierita pennis, talis sis helitus atris forcibus effundans super ad convexa ferbet, undello congradixerant nomini ornum. 12. And what does all this imagery point at, but the thickening darkness of the nether air verging to the chaos of matter and flowing out from the perpetual motion of the first life, destitute of elasticity, ornus, heavy like that of an enclosed cave, and vast, dangerous, as it is said by some, giving forth a murky odor, like that of graves. It is the black satin of the adepts, and that appearing corruption that precedes the mystical death and regeneration into new life, as describing the same ends. They call it lapis niger, vilis, photons, et cetera rego mundi et orita sicut germinantia. Sendivogius calls it Uranus Saturni, with which he waters his lunar and solar plants, and another, ex mari mea oriunta nebulae, qui ferent aquas benedictus et ipsi irrigant terra set educant herbus et flores. With this allusion, the alchemists also call ether their mineral tree, for they were not so careful to hide this in general, seeing the true species was laid asleep in sense, and doubly locked up, as it were, within both corporeal and spiritual confines, and how far the world was off from the art of unfolding or profiting by it. The reception of Enis in Hades is next described.
Ecce autem, primisib lumina et ortus, sub pedibs mugire solum, et juga coepta mover silvarum, visa ecu ecanes ululare per umbram, adventante da, 13.
And Claudian, to the same effect, poetizes the tremendous advent, jam mihis nunt trepidis delibrum overi sedibius, et clarum dispergia fulmina lucum adventum testate di, jam magnus abimius audita fremitus terris, templum remugit sicropium, sanctasque faces artolic elazin, in striptilimi strident, et squamia curvis colla levanta trita jugis, ecce proculturnus hacate virita figures exhorta. 14, and all this, extravagant and fanciful though it should appear, has been echoed by philosophers, and the Greek descriptions agree in each remarkable particular. Plato, amongst others, likens the descent of the soul into these oblivious realms of generation to an earthquake and other strong convulsions of nature. Psellus, in his valuable commentary, describes the apparitions procured by the Chaldaic rites as of two kinds, the first called superinspection, when he who celebrates the divine rite sees a mere apparition, as, for instance, of light in some form or figure, concerning which the oracle advises, that if anyone sees such a light, he apply not his mind to it, nor esteem the voice proceeding thence to be true. Sometimes, likewise, to many initiated persons, there appear lights in various forms and figures. These apparitions are created by the passions of the soul, in performing divine rites, mere appearances, having no substance, and therefore not signifying anything true. 15. Which vaporous estate of universal being, the poets also fabulously concealed under the satiric form of Pan, who exhibited himself in every variety of atrocious disguises of wild beasts, and monsters, and demoniacal appearances, that he might affright those who would captivate him. Caripit hixabita trepidus formidane ferum enis strictam casim venintibus offert, et ni docticums tenuis sine corpori vitas admonate volata cava subimagine formi, eruit, et frustra ferra diverberit umbris. 16. For it is the imaginative spirit which is the maker of these images, as in dreams, only more intense, as moisture condensed in the air constitutes clouds, which the wind disposes in various forms, so our pneumatic vehicle, becoming humid and condensed beneath our heaven, presents many formidable apparitions to the inner sense, and all the race of demons, so much celebrated by antiquity, appear to have their origin in a life of this kind, viz., from an included vapor of the imagination, nor these, individually belonging, were seen only, but, as it is recorded, each by rapport in this state becomes conversant with the whole phantasmagoric universe of his sphere, hence the platitude of the descriptions and poetical crowding of images to the individual sense. Proclus, commenting on the first Alcibiades of Plato, asserts that material images, assuming the appearance even of things divine, constantly attended on the mysteries, drawing towards them souls not yet sufficiently purified, and separating them from truth, and that such actually appear to be the musae, during the evaporative process of purification, and before the lucid vision of the light within, is further shown in the following passage of the same experienced theologists. In the most holy mysteries, says he, before the presence of the God, the impulsive forms of certain terrestrial demons appear, which call the attention off from undefiled advantages to matter, and again, as in the most holy mysteries, the mystics at first meet with the multiform and many-shaped genera which are hurled forth before the gods, but on entering the interior part of the temple, unmoved and guarded by the sacred rites, they genuinely receive into their bosom divine illumination, and divested of the divine nature. The same method takes place in the speculation of wholes. 17. For the reason of this life imitates, inasmuch as it is able, and obeys instinctively its motive light, and as the natural intellect is liable to error, so the spiritual also, not yet perfected, is liable to be caught in the traps of these exterior spirits, which being, as Basil Valentine, in his alchemical chariot, observes, endowed with senses and understanding, know arts, and have in themselves an occult operative life, giving testimony also of their virtue in the art of healing and other secrets, by which they deceive and detain the unwary from the search of better things. 18. The writings of the Middle Ages abound likewise with descriptions of these demoniacal natures. Regular descriptions of them are given by Agrippa, 19, and Trithemius, 20, Ancellus, 21, Proclus, 22, Iamblichus, 23, and Porphyry, 24, allude to their material efficacy and operation in divine works, where desire, entering into those aerial forms, is said to vivify them, and the Chaldaic oracle even persuades that there are pure demons, natura suadet esse demonis puris, et mali materii germini utilia et bona, and that the germinations even of evil matter are of use. 25. Synesius mentions them also as the progeny of matter, and as having an energetic virtue, but at natural war with the truth-seeking soul. 26. And Proclus, in his hymn to the sun, designates them as demons who machinate 1,000 ills, pregnant with ruin to our wretched souls, that merged beneath life's dreadful-sounding sea and bodies chained they willingly may toil, nor e'er remember in the dark abyss the splendid palace of their sire sublime. And it is the dread of such an oblivion there below that the oracle announces to intellect in those solemn tones, Ducat animi profunditas immortalis occia losca fatim, omd sursum extend, let the immortal depth of thy soul be predominant, and all thy eyes extend upwards, incline not to the dark world whose depth is a faithless bottom and Hades dark all over, squalid, delighting in images, unintelligible, precipitous, and a depth always rolling full of stupidity and folly. 27. Umbrum hic locus estate, somni noctis sapori. 28. If the soul on its departure, says Porphyry, still possesses a spirit turbid from humid exhalations, it then attracts to itself a shadow and becomes heavy, and a spirit of this kind naturally strives to penetrate into the recesses of the earth, unless a certain other cause draws it in a contrary direction, as, therefore, the soul when surrounded with this testaceous and tarry investment necessarily lives on the earth, so likewise when it attracts a moist spirit, it is necessarily surrounded with the image, but it attracts moisture when it continually endeavors to associate with nature, whose operations are effected in moisture, and which are rather under the earth. When however the soul earnestly desires to depart from nature, that is, strives to penetrate centrally without exploring the intermediate spheres, then she becomes a dry splendor from exhalation. 29. Hence that renowned saying of Heraclitus, that a dry soul is the wisest, for the soul looking at things posterior to herself beholds the shadow and images of her vaporous vehicle, but when she is converted to herself, she evolves her proper essence and irradiates the whole circumference with her own abundant oxygenating and dispersive light. 30. Thus Hermes, extract from the ray its shadow and its obscurity, by which the clouds hang over it, and corrupt and keep away the light, by means of its constriction, also, and fiery redness it is burned. Take, my son, this watery and corrupted nature, which is as a coal holding the fire, which if thou salt withdraw so often until the redness is made pure, then it will associate with thee, by whom it was cherished and in whom it rests. 31. Visitibus interior terri rectificando, invnis occultum lapidum, verum medicianum, visit the interior of the earth rectifying, says the sage, and thou shalt find the hidden stone, the true medicine, not the feculent dead soil, but our dark divulged chaotic life from sense, which opened and rectified, dissolved and reunited, is changed from an earthly to a spiritual body, by rapport divine. In such a process it would seem the alchemists discovered the hidden principles of nature, as, experimentally passing thought the animal and vegetable into the mineral circulation of her law. They describe the life of all things here below to be a thick fire imprisoned in a certain incombustible aerial moisture, ignis rubus superdorsum ignis candidi, which moisture in its native state, before it is purified by the inflowing light of reason, is that Hades we are treating of, the purgatory of the wise, wherein the consciousness, becoming artificially wrapped by the mysteries, continues for a while in a state of solicitude and painful amazement, unable of itself to discover, through so great a cloud of darkness, that hypostatic reality towards which it is instructed evermore to aspire, and until this attraction is found and finally established in union, the oppressive powers display their mutual forces in discordant dissolute array, as the alchemists, with all who have been profoundly experienced in this ground, relate each in his own instructive way, warning about the conduct through it, and the many real, though chimerical horrors and enticing phantoms that haunt around, guarding the secret chamber of their mineral soul. For, as the sage in Enoch declares it, lead and tin are not produces from earth as the primary fountain of their production, but there is an angel standing upon it, and that angel struggles to prevail. 32. Vaughan notes the same in the Regio Fantastica of his hieroglyphic, and elsewhere, speaking of the mineral nature or first matter, he says, the eye of man never saw her twice under one and the same shape, but as clouds driven by the wind are forced to this and that figure, but cannot possibly retain one constant form, so was she persecuted by the fire of nature. 33. As, by the re-entering light of reason in the mysteries, which is that sulphur of adepts, causing all this manifold scenery in the disruption of life. O nature, the most wonderful creatrix of natures, cries Hermes, which containest and separatest all things in a middle principle. Our stone comes with light and with light it is generated, and then it brings forth the clouds, and darkness which is the mother of all things. 34. Raymond Lully, also, in his Compendium of Alchemy, calls the first principles of the art, spiritus fugitives in aero condensators, in forma monstrorum divisorum et animalium etiam hominum, qui vatent sicut nubes, modo hint modo luck. That is to say, certain fugitive spirits condensed in the air, in shape of divers monsters, beasts, and men, which move like clouds hither and thither. In an outward acceptation such an announcement of principles would be absurd, or what possible interpretation could afford them a place in common sense, or whence, if they be true, and Lully's name stands well for their defense, were they so probably brought to the cognizance of the philosopher, as from the self-inspection of them in life. But Lully, indeed, calls these chaotic forms first principles, not because they are permanent or their essence rational, in that unctuous dark condition, but because within the material extreme of this life, when it is purified, the seed of spirit is at last found, which the adept further describes as being found in the process are decompounded ends, extremely heavy, shining through the darkness like a fiery star, being full of eyes like pearls or aglets, for it is the whole Demogogon, as yet not actually animated by contact of his own returning light. The father of it, says Vaughan, is a certain inviolable mass, for the parts of it are so firmly united you can neither pound them to dust, nor separate them by violence of fire. 35. This is the rock in the wilderness, because in great obscurity and difficult to find the way of, compassed about with darkness, clouds, and exhalations, as it were dwelling in the bowels of the earth, our viscous soul, as Synesius calls it, circulating in the midst of all her Adamical defilements, and which Plato compares to that marine glaucus so deformed by the foreign weeds and parasites that had grown about him, that in every respect he resembled a beast rather than what he really was. 36. In such a deplorable condition is the divine germ of humanity said to be beheld under the thousand evils of its birth, monstrum, horrendum, inform, ingens, cui luminadem 2. There is a curious figurative account given in a letter circulated under the name of the Brethren of the Rosy Cross, which appears to have reference to this passage of initiatory progress in the mysteries. It may be rendered thus: there is a mountain situated in the midst of the earth or center of the world, which is both small and great. It is soft, also above measure, hard, and strong. It is far off, and near at hand, but, by the providence of God, it is invisible. In it are hidden most ample treasures, which the world is not able to value. This mountain, by envy of the devil, who always opposes the glory of God and the felicity of man, is compassed about with very cruel beasts and ravenous birds, which make the way thither both difficult and dangerous, and therefore, hitherto, because the time is not yet come, the way thither could not be sought after by all, but only by the worthy man's self-labor and investigation. To this mountain you should go in a certain night, when it comes most long and dark, and see that you prepare yourself by prayer. Insist upon the way that leads to the mountain, but ask not of any man where it lies, only follow your guide who will offer himself to you and will meet you in the way. 37. This guide will bring you to the mountain at midnight, when all things are silent and dark. It is necessary that you arm yourself with a resolute heroic courage, lest you fear those things that will happen and fall back. 38. You need no sword or other bodily weapon, only call upon you God, sincerely and heartily seeking him. When you have discovered a mountain, the first miracle that will appear is this: a most vehement and very great wind that will shale the whole mountain and shatter the rock to pieces. You will be encountered by lions, dragons, and other terrible wild beasts, but fear not any of these things. 39. Be resolute, and take heed that you return not, for your guide who brought you thither will not suffer any evil to befall you. As for the treasure, it is not yet discovered, but it is very near. After this wind will come an earthquake which will overthrow those things which the wind had left. Be sure you fall not of. The earthquake beige past, there shall follow a fire that will consume the earthly rubbish, and discover the treasure, but as yet you cannot see it. 40. After all these things, and near daybreak, there shall be a great calm, and you shall see the day star arise, and the darkness will disappear. You will conceive a great treasure. The chiefest thing, and the most perfect, is a certain exalted tincture with which the world, if it served God and were worthy of such gifts, might be tinged and turned into most pure gold, and thus much of the concordance of these famous Christian philosophers who, if they had not promised gold, and proclaimed prodigies after an entertaining Arabian Nights fashion, would never, probably, have been thought of by the world, or inquired after, as they were, over Europe during the last century, but without success, for they who have this knowledge know where and how likewise to bestow it, discerning betwixt the lovers of mammon and of truth, fearing the dangerous curiosity of the vulgar herd also, we observe, the Greeks pass by in silence the physical revealments of these Tartarian realms, or, poetizing the great experience, evaporate in fancy, as it were, the teeming life therein opened with its overflowing spirit and light of increase. Let none admire that riches grow in hell, that soil may best deserve the precious bane, and here let those who boast in mortal things, and wondering tell of Babel and the works of Memphian kings, learn how the greatest monuments of fame and strength and art are easily outdone by spirits reprobate. 41. And further, how these our gain may be surpassed and vanish, as Aladdin's rapid castle into air, before the discriminate radiance of celestial light, and as in the pursuit of other sciences and arts, though, and persevering labor and experience are required to ensure success, so should those delusive visions and errors which occur during the conscious transference to a more excellent condition of being be considered, in like manner, not as derogatory or casting a doubt at all upon the ultimate truth of divine science, but as obstacles rather contrary to it, as evil is to good everywhere adverse. We do not, therefore, linger here any more to consider the different allotments, the longer or shorter periods which engaged pure or impure souls in Hades, their habits or the triple path arising from their essences, all which is indicated in the Platonic discourses, and most of which is abound with symbolical theories and poetical descriptions concerning the descent, ascent, and intermediate wanderings, expiatory punishment and sacrifices and things of a similar import, which the rites enjoined, before the aspirants, by the Greeks called mustae, were passed on by the hierophant of the inner temple to its immortal abode, for such was Tartarus, the next beyond Hades, according to the ethics, the alone eternal hypostasis to be redeemed from thence, from the oblivious realms of generation, into the Elysium recollection of wisdom in the highest consciousness. But the soul is said to be in Hades all the while that her hypostasis continues in darkness, that is, we would say, whilst she regards her image objectively, before attaining to the experimental knowledge. And here the lesser mysteries ended, the soul as it were, on the borders of the Stygian lake in view of Tartarus, which Euripides has elegantly styled also a dream of death, and the conformity between death and this next initiation, is strikingly exhibited in a passage preserved by Stoboius from an ancient record. It has been well rendered by Dr. Warburton, and runs thus: the mind is affected and agitated in death, just as it is in initiation into the grand mysteries, and word answers to word, as well as thing to thing, for is to dies, and is to be initiated. The first stage is nothing but errors and uncertainties, labourings, wandering, and darkness, and no, arrived on the verge of death and initiation, everything wears a dreadful aspect, it is all horror, trembling, sweating, and affrightment. But this scene once over, a miraculous and divine light displays itself, and shining plains, and flowery meadows, open on all hands before them. Here they are entertained with hymns and dances, and with sublime and sacred knowledges, and with reverend and holy visions, and now become perfect and initiated, they are free, and no longer under restraint, but crowned and triumphant, they walk up and down in the regions of the blessed. 42, but all, during the transition, is described as wearing a fearful aspect, and dread fills the soul about to relinquish her natal bond in life. Neither may it be irrelevant to call in mind that repeated advice of Solomon, that, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, as the spiritual regard in the mysteries, already involuted, and drawing towards its end, with awe, begins to perceive itself in that identic source. And shall we not believe that it was out of the same intimate experience that the son of Dirach, inciting men to search after the divine wisdom, confesses, that, at first she will walk with him by crooked ways, and bring fear and dread upon him, and torment him with her disciplines, until she may trust his soul, and try him by her law. Then she will return the straight way unto his, says the divine teacher, and comfort him, and show him her secret. The root of wisdom is to fear the Lord, and the branches thereof are long life. Strive for the truth, even unto death, and the Lord shall fight for thee. 43. So, likewise, we read, that there is in alchemy a certain noble body, which is moved from one lord to another, in the beginning of which there is suffering with vinegar, but, in the end, joy with exaltation. O happy gate of blackness, cries the adept, which art the passage to so glorious a change. Study, therefore, whoever applies thyself to this art, only to know this secret, for to know this, indeed, is to know all, but to be ignorant of this, is to be ignorant of all. Take away, therefore, the vapor from the water, and the blackness from the oily tincture, and death from the feces, and by dissolution thou shalt possess a triumphant reward, even that in and by which the possessors live. 44. In the beginning of Phaedo, Plato, by Socrates, asserts, that it is the business of philosophers to study how to be dead. Plotinus, at the same time reprobating suicide, has the same doctrine, but Porphyry, in his auxiliaries to the perception of intelligible natures, explains the meaning of these others, for there is, says he, a twofold death, the one indeed universally known, in which the body is liberated from the soul, but the other peculiar to philosophers, in which the soul is liberated from the body, nor does the one entirely follow the other. That which nature binds, nature also dissolves. That which the soul binds, the soul likewise can dissolve. Nature, indeed, binds the body to the soul, but the soul binds herself to the body. Nature therefore liberates the body from the soul, but the soul may also liberate herself from the body. 45. That is to say, if she know how, and have the right disposition awarded, she may dissolve her own disposition awarded, she may dissolve her own conceptive vehicle, even the parental bond, and return consciously, the elementary principles remaining, nor yet suffered to depart, under the dominion of another law to life. That was the way to precious death, spoken of by the Hebrews and academics. This the happy gate of blackness celebrates by the old adepts, the head of Hermes' crow, which is in the beginning of the work, that which was fixed, viz., the sensual compact, is dissolved, and that which is dissolved is renovated, and hence the corruption and evil of mortality is made manifest in the ultimate circulation of the matter to be renewed, and on either side it is a signal of art, and all without destruction to the mortal body. If perhaps someone values this, the willing life was made to pass out of its present oblivious fall, through regeneration, into the reminiscent consciousness of her causal source, as the truth-telling oracle again declares that, if thou extend the fiery mind to the work of piety, thou shalt preserve the flexible body likewise, even through death, re-entering into and fortifying it with the elixir of an immortal life. Orandamus statat sit mens sana in corpore sano. Seek thou the way of the soul, whence and by what order, having served the body, he same from which thou dost flow, thou must return and rise up again, joining action to sacred speech. 46. Suppose anyone beginning at the top of an artificial edifice, should undertake to decompose it stone by stone, setting all aside, with the dirt and rubbish, as he proceeds, he would at last come to the earth which is at the foundation, and have space to build up anew, and thus it would appear to be in the Hermetic process, if anyone should take the natural life as it presents itself, opening and analyzing the parts thereof, spiritually and wisely, one from another, graciously, as the mandate runs, terra abini, subtle auspicio, suaviter multo ingenio, he would arrive finally at the basement, wherein is hidden the true alkaline original of life in this threefold essence separately contained, and this, the adept tells us, is the syllogism it best behoves us to look after, for he that has once passed the aquaster, and entered the fire world, sees what is both invisible and incredible to common men. He shall discover the miraculous conspiracy that is between the Presta and the sun, the external and internal fire of life, the thing desiring and the thing desired. He shall know the secret love of heaven and earth, and why all influx of fire descends against the nature of fire, and comes from above downwards, until having found a body, it reascends therewith in perpetual interchange. He shall know, continues the adept, and see how the fire spirit has its root in the spiritual fire earth, and receives from its root in the spiritual fire earth, and receives from it a secret influx upon which it feeds, a body inaccessible, than which there is nothing more ancient, vigorous, and young, the salt of Saturn, that most abstruse principle of the stone, the most ancient demogorgon, Etherodempto, deprived of light, whose perpetual motion emanates the first material universe, and is the mineral soul. This is the earth, distinguished by Anaxagoras, which abiding durably in the center, hands loftily, but its being is Tartarus, and the light-hating world, and the winding current by which many things are swallowed up. Stoop not down, for a precipice lies below in the earth, drawing through the ladder which hath 7 steps, beneath which is the throne of necessity. Enlarge not thou thy destiny, the soul will, after a manner, clasp God to herself. 47. As Porphyry, in our motto head, declares that, it is necessary that the soul when purified should associate with its generator, and the virtue of its after this conversion is said to consist in a scientific knowledge of true being, which cannot be obtained either otherwise or without such a conversion.
Ubiatam quisque felix gnarus dai sacrorum, vitam piat, acaninum initiator giris bacchans in montibus.
Sacris purus at lustrationibus, 48, but, perhaps, inquisitive reader, you will very anxiously ask, what was said and done? I would tell you, replies the Epidaurian, if it could be lawfully told, but both the ears and tongue are guilty of indiscretion. Nevertheless, I will not keep you in suspense with religious desire, nor torment you with a long-continued anxiety. Hear therefore, but believe what is true. The priest, then, all the profane being removed, taking me by all the profane being removed, taking me by the hand, brought me to the penetralia of the temple. I approached the confines of death, and, having trod the threshold of Proserpine, I returned from it, being carried through all the elements. At midnight I saw the sun shining with a splendid light, and I manifestly drew near to the gods above and beneath, and proximately adored them. Behold, I have narrated to you things of which, though heard, it is nevertheless necessary that you should be ignorant. 49. By no explanation, nor any familiar analogy do we here presume to aid the natural intellect to a conception that transcends it, and which can only be attained through the identical experience. Yet reason may, just perceive it, and which can only be attained through the identical experience. Yet reason may, just perceive it, but abstractly only as an inference, yet it is her true hypostasis, for which, as Isis for Osiris, she is constantly seeking, her objective reality in the great unknown. The rude, uneducated reason, however, which serves sensibles without reflection, will not understand, but that only which, seeing something more in causation than mere antecedents, can reflect into the intelligible substance of her law. For there the true efficient is to be found, which is not externally developed, but, becoming conjoined in consciousness, the soul knows herself as a whole which before knew but a part only of her human nature, and proceeding thus, by theurgic assistance, arrives at her desired end, and participating of deity, perceives then and knows, as Plotinus gratefully expresses it, that the supplier of life is present, and free from all external perturbation and desire. Percipiently included in the circular necessity of her law, believes its revelation which is her very self. This is the introspection which Sellus speaks of, as distinguished from the superinspection which takes place in Hades, when the initiated person sees the divine light itself without any form or figure. This the oracle called sacrosancto, for that is seen with a beauty by sacred person, and glides up and down pleasantly through the depths of the world. This will not deceive, but as the oracle in fine advises, when thou sayest a fire without form, shining flashingly through the depths of the world, hear the voice of fire. 50. The same solemn and articulate instruction is given in an Indian record, translated by Sir William Jones, as follows: accept the first cause, whatever may appear or may not appear in the mind, know that to be the mind's maya, or image or delusion, as of light or darkness, as the great elements are in various beings entering, yet not entering, thus am I, in them and yet not in them. Even thus far may inquiry be made by him who seeks to know the principle of mind in union and separation, which must be everywhere and always. 51. And in the book of Deuteronomy, 4th chapter, the unfigured form of the divine essence is noted in several places, and in the book of Zohar, it is explained that before the descent into creation divinity has no form, and therefore it was forbidden to represent him under any image whatever, even so much as a letter or point, and in this sense we are to understand the mandate: take good heed unto yourselves, for ye saw no manner of similitude on the say that the Lord spake unto you in Horeb out of the midst of the fire. 52. But then the revelations we have here gathered, and which are but a small part indeed of what has been described of the visions, and awful accompaniments which took place in the celebration of the greater mysteries, have been explained away as trifling exhibitions, orreries, as some say, contrived after the fashion of Walker's Aloids by those unfigured lights, it has been argued, were meant asteroids, whilst the figured are supposed agreeably to represent constellations of stars, grouped together in a more defined form. The whole, in fact, has been regarded as a moving panorama and illusory display of lights. But what extreme of trifling or fantastic folly has not modern imagination ascribed to the ancient mind, and how commonly mistaken and useless do not its best relics remain, for want of a corresponding intelligence in latter times. Allegories of recondite experience, truthful fables, symbols replete with instruction and refined emblems of art, have been either trivially interpreted, or condemned as futile without appeal. Even those life-bound mysteries, those disciplines, purifications, sacred and primordial rites have gone for nothing, or as good for nothing, whilst astronomy has been the imputed spirit of the whole, on risk of some ridicule. Therefore, and dilettante scorn, we continue by our clue, leaving the darker scenes of life's drama, to look beyond, even upon that beautiful sunlit horizon of the more Gentian, rising to intellectual radiance, as of the real life. Thus Proclus says, that to the wise indeed all things possess a silent and arcane tendency, and intellect is excited to the beautiful with astonishment and motion, for the illumination from it and its efficacy, acutely pervade through every soul, and as being the most similar of all things to the good, it converts every soul that surveys it. The soul also, beholding that which is arcane, shining forth as it were to view, rejoices in and admires that which sees, and is astonished about it, and as in the most holy mysteries, prior to the mystic spectacles, those who are initiated are said to be seized with astonishment and dread, so in intelligibles, prior to the participation of the good, beauty shining forth astonishes those that behold it, converts the soul to itself, and being established in the vestibules of the good, shows what that is which is in the adita, and what the transcendency is of occult being. Through these things, therefore, conclude the philosopher, let it be apparent whence beauty originates, and how it first shines forth, and also that animal, life, itself is the most beautiful of all intelligibles. 53. But Apuleius no less directly indicates the nature of his own mysterious revelation where, speaking of the intellectual contact which the wise have proved, when they were separated from body, through the energies of mind, he says, calling his divine master also to witness, that this knowledge sometimes shines forth with the most rapid coruscation like a bright and clear light in the most profound darkness. 54. And Plato himself, speaking in like manner of the intellectual intuition, in his 7th epistle, writes from long converse with this thing itself, accompanied by a life in conformity to it, on a sudden a light, as it were a leaping fire, will be enkindled in the soul, and will there itself nourish itself. 55. And heaven, he adds in another place, is the kindled intelligence of the first intelligible, and sight looking to things above is heaven. 56. And the sense of sight is celebrated by all these, therefore, as not only beautiful and useful for the purposes of this life, but as a leader in the acquisition of wisdom, for it is not that very light which in us looks out beaming on our eyes that, directed within, and being purified also, and scientifically inquiring, discovers at last that other light which is the substance of its own, until light meeting light apprehends itself alone, while through the middle of life's boisterous waves, thy soul robust the deep's death tumult braves, oft beaming from the God's eye-piercing sight, beholds in paths oblique a sacred light, whence rapt from sense with energy divine, before her eye immortal splendors shine, whose plenteous rays in darkness most profound, thy steps directed and illuminated round, nor was the vision like the dreams of sleep, but seen whilst vigilant you brave the deep. While from your eyes you shake the gloom of night, the glorious prospects bursts upon your sight. 57. Open the compound creature, look up the elements, divide the elements, and you shall find the quintessential nature. Open this, continues the adept, and you shall conceive the subtle ulteriority of the angelical spirit in which is the divine act, and immediate beam or wisdom from God. In this work, therefore, there concurreth in the separation of the first, a sensible aspect, in the other we behold with intellectual eyes, so that you may observe how all is in everything, and everything in all, as Hermes alludes, qui fornisam cum vas nostra construt, novum mundum conflat, he that maketh a furnace with our glass to it maketh a new world. 58, a new hypostasis, and a new stone, even that stone of the apocalypse, the true crystalline rock without spot or darkness, that renowned terra maga in ethia clarificata, which carries in its belly wind and fire. Having got this fundamental of a little new world, says Vaughan, unite the heaven in triple proportion to the earth, and then apply a generative heat to both, and they will attract from above the staffer of nature. So hast thou the glory of the whole world, therefore let all obscurity flee before thee. 59 This is the true astrum solis gotten and conceived, the internal spiritual sun which is the perpetual motion of the wise, and that Saturnian salt which, developed to intellect and made erect, subdues all nature to his will, for it is the whole Demogorgon, now actually animated, which before was made visible without its subject light, but at length becoming ignited, reflects from out the dark abyss of being, as a Lucifer's wheel, with its radiant sections, all comprehending in their law, as the oracle again proclaims, fire, the derivation and dispenser of fire, whose hair pointed is seen in his native light, hence comes Saturn, the sun assessor beholding the pure pole, and this we take to be that midnight sun of Apuleius, the ignited stone of Anaxagoras, for which that philosopher has suffered such abundant disrepute, under error that his allusion was to the luminary of this world. This is the triumphal chariot of antimony, the armed magnet of Helvetius turned swiftly about the current axle of life, which is the wheel of fire signalized in Ezekiel, seen by the Hebrew prophets, Moses, David, and Zechariah, in which all things are transfigured, and this is the stone with the new name written in the Revelation, and that salt which the Saviour orders that we should have it in ourselves, and is the same with the prester of Zoroaster, which in the Chaldean sense means the fire spirit of life, and is that identity in all which sustains all by the efflux of his power, the supernatural center of every living thing, the infinitely powerful and all-efficient making power. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men, and the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. 60. And that light shining in darkness, if men had never known, how should they have asserted? Do theologians invent such things in the present day? Neither did they formerly invent, but what they knew and had seen, declared. To as many as received the Spirit, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, which were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. This therefore is that power which is hidden in man, the true light which lighteth every man that cometh into the world, if haply one might feel after him and find him, an enchanted treasury known only to the wisely simple who have subdued their will to the law of wisdom, as Abraham did, as soon as he had gotten the creature into his hands. 61. We omit many things here relating to the mystical death and regeneration, which may be better understood when we come to treat of the manifestation of the philosophic subject, adding merely at present, in conclusion from our doctors, that the grand perfection of their art was to multiply the prester and place him in the most supreme ether, which is that Augean palace already prepared for him in the beginning, where, as in a suitable habitation, he abides shining, not burning as below, or wrathful, but vital, calm, transmuting, recreating, and no longer a consuming fire.